We living in the scriptures of Revelation. They gotta separate church and state.
Welcome to Church and State, where we boldly take on the collision of two topics that often brings about energetic and polarizing discussions: politics and religion. You can't talk about it at the dinner table. It can get heated at the barbershop. But we're going to talk about it right here.
I am New York State Assemblywoman Latrice Walker.
And I am Reverend Dr. Robert Waterman.
And together we are Church and State.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning, Reverend Waterman. How are you today? It's officially spring in the big city, and on the state level, that also means it's budget time. The State Assembly and the Senate have released their one-house budgets, basically counter proposals to the governor's spending plan, which was released in early January. We'll be negotiating for at least the next several weeks to reach an agreement that will result in a final budget that determines how hundreds of billions of dollars will be spent on education, public safety, healthcare, and so many other areas to improve the lives of New Yorkers. We'll definitely get into the budget in future episodes, but today's hot topic, of course, is the mayoral election. Reverend Waterman, you've mentioned in previous episodes that candidates make their way to Black churches in droves during election season. Well, the primary is coming up in June. Spill the tea. Who has already been to your church and who's coming?
Greetings, Assemblywoman Walker. We don't kiss and tell. Once again, springtime is one of the most fascinating time of the year. Everything that was dead comes back to life. Things that was buried grows. The seed that you planted is the one that you see. And so I love spring is because a lot of people plant a lot of stuff in the winter. And that's like relationships also. You can't plant nothing in the winter and expect things to grow in the spring. So it's like election time, is that a lot of people plant nothing during the times that they're not running, but then when it's time to run, they all seem to come out of the woodwork and say, you remember me. But you can't remember anything that you have not actually built a relationship with. So I just wanted to say that based upon the springtime that's happening.
There's also some opportunities in the wintertime to be able to treat, the things that you're growing, as you say, some of those downtime periods. And so I know that there are still other elected officials who have sort of long-standing relationships with the Black church, and they're not just sort of these sort of pop-up elected officials that just show up at any point in time. Like, for instance, I know that leader Hakeem Jeffries is a frequent, not just a parishioner of a particular church, but he also brings a message forward sometimes when he attends different churches as well.
Right.
And I always enjoy too, during caucus weekend, there would be Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. Mm-hmm. She get up there and she speaks and she does her thing, and you can tell that it's not sort of made up, that there's something else about this young lady that
somebody ordained her and we don't know about it.
I'm not saying she's ordained, but she definitely grew up in church. She attends enough to know the buzzwords. Almost like with law school, you take the bar exam. You don't have to know everything about the law, but you got to know those buzzwords is going to make people think you know what you're talking about.
Oh, let's stop right there. Those buzzwords. So the buzzword that a lot of electeds use, because you're in politics, is it authentic or is it just something you learned? The buzzwords, to speak to different communities, when you approach it, you study the buzzwords that get people hype. Tell me about that.
No, I wouldn't say necessarily. So
Not that she does it, but since we're
you're
there.
talking about in church or just in general?
In general, politicians pick up buzzwords that when they go to different community, this is what I got to say, because they have good people that they build around them to give them a script on what to study when they're going into different areas. So the question would be, is this just buzz opportunity, or this is sincere and authentic, that when they come to the houses of worship, do they really believe what they say?
Well, I wouldn't say that they don't believe what they say, right? But there are certain buzzwords when it comes to politics: public safety, education, healthcare, seniors, housing, economic development. So whenever you hear those words, like those are sort of the general sort of big umbrella issues
But when they
that
go to
most
church,
people.
they say, Glory to God. Praise Him. Thank you, Jesus. All is well. Good to see you. We're having a wonderful, blessed day. Buzzwords. So again,
Those are the
yeah,
buzzwords.
so you
Those weren't
learning
the buzzwords I
buzzwords.
was thinking about, but more so, going back to the senator. She's gonna get up there. She's gonna start speaking about parables. She's going to talk about different individuals in the Bible, whether she's speaking of David or she's speaking of Esther, let's say for instance. And so at least there is some modicum of the fact that maybe she already has a little bit of a relationship in church or connected, and definitely we always talk about sending God-fearing people to be in the elected space, because we want to also have a sense of who it is that they are responding to, who it is that they belong to, and who it is, and what values they'll keep first.
So it's like saying, from my perspective, is that having a relationship with God is easy, will make it easy for you to have a relationship with people. So, especially in church.
Right.
So, if I have a relationship with God, it's easy for me to communicate with those that are in different areas of religion, because my relationship with God, not my politics, but my relationship with God helps me to speak to those at the level that they are. Yes, politics come later, but the relationship is built through the spirituality component with elected officials if they have a relationship with God.
So do you think that that's a part of the requirement in order to be able to speak to people? Because not everyone, and then different people, of course, there's one God, but different people have different faiths.
Right.
And so they may come to the table with a different sort of background and a different perspective. But do you think that may sort of change a person's ability to communicate?
I think with the different aspects of faith, one would have to, because God is the center, Jehovah, Elohim, Allah, based upon your language. Because all those that I said in Jewish and Arabic is the same name of God in English, as how you understand the people you're dealing with of faith, that which they practice, right? So again, when you go into any house of worship as a politician, you have to really understand the practice of the God that they serve, even though, from my perspective, we serve the same God. It's just how we practice our faith. And so you adapt yourself to the practice of the faith, but you still have to maintain a relationship before you can even practice anybody's faith.
So you're saying then, so like back to the buzzwords, right? So the person get up and speak and says, giving honor to God who's ahead of my life, bam, this young person right here, or this particular speaker, they grew up in a Baptist church.
You assume.
Right.
One would assume, oh, they grew up in church because they're speaking buzz language. I wrote a book, God Has Left a Building, and I did an experiment with not using church language and still be able to connect with people. And so I took all of my young adult and I opened a sober lounge and I told them to invite all your friends. But this is the key. You cannot use the buzzwords or the gospel language or the religious language to communicate with people, to really find out where people are. And so we took away that. that whole book that I wrote, we took away the language, and they had to really now concentrate on communicating to people where they are, because I don't believe Jesus used buzzwords in order for him to communicate to those that were wayward, those that were lost, those that were outcasts.
But he still knew how to speak to, he knew how to speak to the times, and he knew how to speak to the politics.
He spoke to the needs.
He also spoke to the politics, right? He spoke to the taxes. He spoke to paying penance. He spoke to changing the social dynamics of people believing that they had to get to God through these other realms, and opens up the opportunity that, look, I can have my own relationship with God. I don't have to go through these other people. He also spoke to the building of the church's sort of foundation. And so these things weren't things that were glamorous, based on, what was happening under a kingdom. And so then also understanding the politics and understanding how to get to people and empowering people, right? Because people were now becoming more empowered to have their own relationship with God for themselves, as opposed to having to go through all these other means. And so he did know to speak those same sort of buzzwords when he were having conversations.
Right, like you indicated, paying taxes. He told them, go down to the pond in the fish's mouth, get the taxes, render unto Caesar what is Caesar, right? So here it is that there was never a separation of politics or politics in church. It's always been a combination of what government does and what the church does. When government kind of infiltrate into the church has to stop being the church in order to serve the people. A sense of when you do feeding programs, senior programs, or any programs, you cannot use religion as a or for lack of a better word, you cannot proselyte people, meaning that you cannot offer them God, but you can offer them food, being a church. So how is it that when elected officials come to the church, they want us to offer their vote? They want us to offer our vote to them, but yet there's still a combination of separation in their mental mind on, I'm just here for the vote. I'm not really here for God. That's why. So help me out with all the elected officials that do drive-bys and don't stop to worship. What's that all about?
I think that's,
Since we're talking about the mayoral, there's a couple of, we got public advocate, we got a couple of elections that are coming up where is it because I want to say, I might not know, and maybe I'm saying it wrong, but when they go to the Jewish community, they stay for the whole entire worship. But it seems as when they come to the Black community, they want to do drive-bys through the Black community versus staying to build relationship, staying to communicate, to find out what is it that the people, because if you say I'm running to serve the people, I got to find out what they want. But if I'm hitting 10 churches in one day, one Sunday, I'm doing 5 8 o'clocks, then I'm doing another 3 11 o'clock, then I'm doing another 3 o'clock, and then I'm going to do 2 for 6 p.m. So if I'm hitting all those churches in one day, am I really getting to know the people? Do I really have a relationship with God, or I'm really just trying to get a vote?
so here's, at the end of the day, when we're at a point as elected officials and we're doing these kind of drive-bys, it's because we're looking to get a vote. Typically, those opportunities come towards the end of a campaign, not the beginning, or not when the person first decides that they want to get out there and run for office. So during that lead up period before an election actually takes place, you have ample opportunity to attend 1 8 a.m., 1 10 a.m., 11 a.m., or 10 a.m., a 1 p.m. if there's a 3 o'clock service, and do just church all day long. for a number of reasons. Number one, because it's important to be in church, particularly if you're grounded in that realm.
If you have a relationship with God.
Right.
Uh-huh.
Now, two, this is also a meeting space where you're going to find a number of people gathered on a particular day. And so for the political side of it, you want to be able to always speak to as many people at one particular given time. Three, most of these individuals, your parishioners, are generally organized around a particular thing, whether or not it's, coming to church or the food pantry or, serving on the choir or following the pastor. Typically, there's a level of organization and there's leadership. And so again, you always want to connect with the leader as well as having an opportunity to speak with the people who are members of the leader's team. And then lastly, when it comes to politics and election day, once a campaign moves into what we call GOTV, get out the vote, now it becomes, how do you hit as many places that you can in order to say to people, to let people know that, hey, I am running for office and election day is on Tuesday. And I think that those are two different types of campaign stops. One is more about worship and support, and then the other one is about getting out the vote.
Okay, so where is the respect of worship in it? Because again, I've been to some of our Jewish brothers and sisters synagogues for their Sabbath on a Saturday, and the electeds stay all day.
Even in the last couple of weeks of an election?
I believe, because what I'm finding out is that style, the second part of the style that you talked about, that GOT, get out the T, they do that in the beginning. It's never a two-part when it comes down to the black church. It's always, I got to get out. But here. Maybe I might get in trouble for this one. And maybe it's not the electeds. Maybe it's the campaign managers,
the operatives.
the operatives who actually set the black churches up as though it's a drive-by versus I need you to know these people, right? Because if I get 100 of you to vote for me versus 10 of you in a drive-by, I could hit 100 churches and I could get 10 out of this, 10 out of this. But if I hit one church and I stay there and I meet the people and the people like me and I tell the people what my plan is and I respect their worship, don't you think that they will get more out of that or get more votes out of that than they would do doing drive-bys? Hey, in the middle of worship, here it is. You can tell me if I'm right or wrong. In the middle, after worship and praise, here we have so-and-so here who's going to speak to you because they got to go. Right? So you stop the service, they come in, they speak, right? And then they go. Now we got to build the service back up. We got to build it back up. Praise got to go back up. God's got to get back in the center or at the top of the service. Oh, they on the run. They got to move to another church, right? Because I got to go to this church at 10:15, go to this church at 10:30, get this church at 10:45, get to the other church at 11 o'clock. And so the optics lay it out in the black community. We got 4 churches here, a block away. And so you're going to run here, get there, get here, get there. And then they call a pastor. Hey, pastor, so-and-so is coming. Is it wrong that the pastor would say, no, they got to stay the whole service?
Well, I have met with pastors who they would require a couple of things. Some don't allow you to leave their church in the middle of service like that. They'll let you know ahead of time. Some pastors will make you meet with them in the morning. And then I also, have run into some pastors who won't let you leave without,
Tithing?
But I wouldn't say tithing, but making an offering.
Doing an offering.
To the church.
Right.
Because it's like a lot of times people will say, and I will never forget this one day. There is a woman who was a trustee at a church. And it was during that time period of GOTV and as you say, operatives running a candidate from one place to the next place. And they came over to me and they said, so and so came to my church the other day and they left before the offering. So people will see that and they
Yes.
watch that. I mean, and they're looking at, I'm living paycheck to paycheck and making just enough money to be broke. And here
Right.
you are, shiny and bright, and you come up in our church and we're struggling, and you're not even providing the level of support that we need in order to keep our heat on. But you are here campaigning and utilizing our resources.
Mm-hmm.
And so I understand that level too. And so the other thing though is how much of that is on the particular pastor to be able to set the tone for how things run in their church.
Yes, I think is upon the pastor as a leader, because he or she is a leader of their community, which is that church, and that would set those standards up. But the electors get offended, or the opters, those who operate the election, gets offended if you do not allow them to come in and do the drive by. Because I really want to know how many electeds really are concerned about the parishioners, and really care about and respect the worship time, being a Jew or Gentile, black, white, whatever. But if Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, Friday evening all the way through, is a worship moment, shouldn't there be a sense of respect that says, hey, even if the optors say the elected should pull back and say, no, I got to respect this house of worship. If I'm going to be elected, I'm going to be elected. But I'm not going to be one of those who just drive by a church because I got 5 churches that I hit.
Now, every now and then I do see elected officials who will do that. Even when I was in a position as an operative, and sometimes I still feel like I'm in that role. They'll say, people will be like, look, we got to keep going to the next one. No, I'm going to hang out here. And they got their notebook out. They're, taking notes, and they're engaged and involved in the worship service.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's different. Different people will bring you a different experience as it relates to how elected officials actually do church. Like one of the things that, I even like to say sometimes that if I have to speak at a church that I'm not that familiar with, and I'll say, look, let me tell you something. I don't play church. I do this. Sometimes I might have to walk out of here with my hand over my head so that you don't be like, that's that same girl who was at church yesterday just shouting. Yes, it was me. And that's based on my relationship and the relationship, and I think and the way that God moves through me, whether it's, speaking in tongues, which is something that was even fairly new to me. And I will never forget the first time that I realized that I had this ability or this gift. And I was in church, I was elected, and having an experience that I couldn't understand.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the day, folk were right there with me. But then after that, when you kind of shake things off a little bit, what happens next, right? It's
Right.
and so you'll get that type of elected official. Like, say for instance, last Sunday, I saw that there was a candidate who attended a local church in Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
And she's a songstress, and had an opportunity to sing at church. And when you saw that, you knew this was something. This wasn't something made up. Like this was real for that particular candidate.
Mm-hmm.
And so you'll get that type of a person. Then you'll get another. Well, you can tell also that they grew up in the Black church, but then you'll get someone else who may be Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
Who, may worship differently, but when they're in church with you, they're doing their thing that really shows you that whatever their sort of methodology of worship was really coming through, even though it might not show in the same way we're used to,
Mm-hmm.
but in their own way, you can tell that they're connecting in a sense. And so I think that it really just becomes, or even, one of the candidates for mayor, is a minister himself.
Right, right, right.
And so he'll, show up and sometimes he's preaching before the church, sometimes not. And so I think with different people, there's sort of different strokes for different folk.
Right. But I also think that there's a sense of responsibility that is given to the elected who who allow others to run campaigns, who are part of a campaign, that they have to give an account to God, even with their people. Because, for example, if you took 2 or 3 body people with you to a church, not knowing that these people might need to hear from God, but you make a decision along with your opter person and said, I'm going to do 10 minutes here, 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there. What what do those people around you get? So it is not just the elected, but it's the pack that travels with them. So you either teaching them how to disrespect church, or you teaching them how to engage with God.
Hmm.
That means if I stayed long, that minister that you're talking about who's running, that candidate who's running, he's a minister. He stays the full time. Hakeem Jeffries he respects the church. D.A. Gonzalez, he's not one that pops all over the place. Once he go to service, he's steady. He stays. You yourself, when you come to visit us.
No one else gets a when they come. Like they there every Sunday.
But it's in a
Gotta
sense
do.
of there are others I think that need to learn, especially this new age, new group of people who don't see the church as a drive-by, but as a point where relationships are developed, a point where their constituents can actually meet, because it is a meeting space. It is a meeting space where after we engage with God, we're supposed to engage with each other. We're supposed to break bread with each other. That is the whole process of building relationship. But if the person comes and 100 people is in the church, and I got to speak, I got to go. I'm running from 100 people to run to 5 people. Sometimes that's crazy.
Yeah, well, no, that 5 may bring 5,000.
Right, but that 100 might bring 10,000.
Well, you're absolutely right. However, it's still something. I think that whenever it is that, I think people should either we have to marry our expectations of the church and elected officials in terms of the elected or the candidate who is running or not running, um, that they have to have a level of respect for worship.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's the other side to it where the church or pastors or the membership also has to think about the industry of politics, in that part of what a politician does is seek out opportunities to speak to gatherings of individuals in order to talk about um, the work that they are either doing or seeking to do in a particular space.
Right, but let's put on that the opportunities, right? For instance, when they select people, and I've experienced it myself, they would send that person ahead, right? That person would come in looking and seeking out for the pastor, right? And in the process of seeking out for the pastor or somebody's in charge, to let them know, hey, that elected is coming in, or that candidate is coming in. Where are they going to sit at?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, all of these pews you pass, but you're asking where they're going to sit at, right? And then the second question is, are they going to get an opportunity to speak, right? And sometimes, as a pastor, you want to be patient. Okay, I got to tell you where you're going to sit. I'm going to say if you're going to speak or not. Then the third question is, what time are they going to speak? Okay, so even the ops that come in already have a schedule set up as though that this is not a worship experience. Want to know where they're going to see, where they're going to sit, what time, where they're going to, if they're going to speak, and what time they're going to get up to speak.
Right.
As from your perspective, I just need to know those 3 things can be very irritating when it comes down to a pastor preparing for worship, right? Because the idea is for everybody who comes in, no matter what status you are, is to meet God. If that's not your first priority, then you might be going to the wrong places.
So here and again, sometimes from my experiences, it's been, let's say, even if you're going into, um, let's say, a Muslim worship experience, whether or not it's,
Mosque.
in the mosque or if it's outside, there will be a set time that they'll say, you need to be here between 9 a.m. and 9:15 a.m. If you don't arrive within that particular period of time, you don't get an opportunity to go at it again. You got to either try again next week, or you just forfeit this opportunity, because once they get into worship, they don't break worship in order to have elected officials come and speak. Let's say even going to the Seventh-day Adventist church, if they tell you to be here between 10 a.m. and 10:30 a.m., you need to arrive at that time. If you get there at 10:35, you're going to be sitting there until after service is over, and then when they open the service back up again to more community, and then you may get an opportunity to speak at that time. So they don't break their church service in order to, have an elected official kind of come in and do their thing.
But the black church do. Why? What do you think that the black church do? That the black church, I've seen it over and over and over, that the black church would break the service in order to satisfy an elected or a candidate. I think is unjust that the candidate allows them to do it, even if they do it, because there's a sense of for me, it's a sense of respect that God does come first. If I know I'm going to a church, I should prepare myself to build relationship, to commune with this church, versus I'm preparing myself to do this schedule. This 15 minutes here, 15 minutes here. I'm getting up at this time. So even in the mosque, in the synagogue, do they get up at this time and walk out and leave? They're done? I was running for city council one time, and I did it twice. I felt so bad, right? And what I tried to do was go to that church, to their early church, and then run back to my church to preach. But I felt so bad and convicted to leave that church and not worship with them. I felt disconnected. I felt I have not really made an impact.
There's two different there's two different roles here, right? And so one of the role is a role of a person, of the cloth as a pastor. And then the other one is a candidate. And a candidate is not a pastor. Sometimes they are. In your case, they were synonymous. But there's a certain ebb and flow even to campaigning, right? Like I was just talking to someone today, a couple of people who are running for city council. You wake up in the morning, this time, 6 o'clock in the morning, you on the subway. 9 o'clock, you dialing for dollars. 12 o'clock, you're at the senior centers. This o'clock, you're over here. That o'clock, you're knocking on doors. And so you have to keep the script and keep the schedule going for your position as a candidate. And if that means on a Saturday, you have a lot of obligations on a Saturday. So for Saturday worshipers, you wake up in the morning, you go and you do your Saturday worship services. You may have had a conversation previously with a number of different pastors who typically it's easier if you have a relationship and you're always there as opposed to just showing up. But you reach out, you say, look, there's a certain, other place I have to be at, because remember at the same time, there are block parties, there are other events. There's a number of different things that are happening. And for a candidate and an operative, they're always trying to think about how do we maximize time and space for our candidate.
Living in the strips of Revelation. They gotta separate church and state.
Thank you all for joining us here at Church and State, because together we are Church and State.
Thank you again, everyone, for listening. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And in the words of Nelson Mandela, it always seems impossible until it's done. Thank you so much.
Maybe I'm just rambling, but isn't it crazy that every time we lose and they win, they get richer?